country, often eager to try something new and walk the path less trodden. Also, government that says one of its big focuses is going to be to encourage entrepreneurship, to encourage startups. What then is holding us back? Why isn't India a present startup nation? Why are we waiting for another couple of years? When exactly are we proposing to get there? Well, with me now, a special panel, people who've been there, done that, doing it, and in fact, trailblazers, all of them in their own right. Let's introduce you to them right away. Ritvika Bhattacharya, CEO at Swaniti Initiative. This connects parliamentarians and elected representatives to their constituencies. Also, Paras Chopra, founder and CEO of Wingify, tools that make money from websites. Simply put, we're going to get more on that from you in just a bit. Sure. Akshay, co-founder and president, Avanti Learning Centers, teaching low-income high school students math and science, and that too in an innovative way through mentors. And Michael Lingdo, co-founder of Tripoto, connecting travelers worldwide. In fact, if you get onto Tripoto, you'll see all the many people that you perhaps know talking about their travel experiences, some of them quite exotic. My first question to all of you, I'll start with you, Ritvika, is how does one decide that a conventional job isn't for you? Because, you know, it's now maybe almost a cliche. But, you know, we keep talking about middle-class India morality and the less appetite to take risks. You know, it's always, something's always holding us back. So how do you decide? Like, how do you decide that this is what I want to do? And of course, today all of you are very successful, but how do you don't know that when you're getting into it?
I think it's a fairly simple litmus test, honestly. If you wake up in the morning and you feel like what you're doing is not adding value and you're literally dragging your feet out of bed, that's it. I think it's time for a change at that point. I mean, I knew it was the case for me, certainly. I was at the World Bank and it's a great place to work, but I wasn't necessarily enjoying or feeling like I was adding value. And that's something which we consistently hear when we actually reach out to candidates. And, you know, people with great profiles, IIMs, doing great jobs which are high paying, wanting to leave them and do a startup or do something new. Because they just don't feel like they're giving back enough, and you know, that waking up in the morning and saying, oh God, I have to go back to work again. That I think is that test, which is like, you know, I need to do something new, something which creates new value to society.
Akshay, had you reached the point too where you sort of, you know, were wondering that, you know, what next? What's going to define me? How do I sort of find my next challenge?
Yeah, I think for me it wasn't so much of what next. It was like, I think everything I've done so far has been very, very impulsive sometimes, right? So I think you sometimes get really excited about doing something and excited enough that the risk reward starts to make sense to you, at least in your own head. So I think for me, really, you know, at this startup and the previous one, it was always just a question of, this is something really exciting, I want to do it. I don't see it being that much of a risk anymore. I think that's important.
Explain that. Why don't you see it as being a risk? Because there's no real formula, right? I mean, it may work one time, it may not really work another time. There are so many factors that go into play.
Yeah, I think and I can talk only to myself, right? I think, you know, all of us have privilege in some ways, right? Where you'd find that most startup, you know, founders either have very strong educational backgrounds or have, you know, ways where we're really not part of the conventional middle class trap, right? So, you know, for me, for instance, what was my downside, right? The worst thing that would have happened is I would have done this for a few years. It may not have worked. I would have still made, you know, great networks amongst investors, people in the space, and gone back to doing a job, right? So really, I often think, like, for me, the risk really wasn't as much as one would make it out to be.
But Michael, does the fear of failure really play on your mind? You worked with a solar platform in the past. You know, like Akshay said, he's worked with, you know, worked on something else as well. So does that really play on your mind? Or
see, the reason I always tell people, I mean, who want to start a company, or you start a company not because you're dissatisfied with your current scenario, current job. That's never a reason to create a company. You only create a company when you actually believe that you're creating a change. You actually believe that the world's going to be a better place because of you, and no one else is doing it. So you do it to make a change. So you go. So a lot of people want to actually go from 1 to n, right? So it's easier to copy, replicate ideas and move on from 1 to n. But moving from 0 to 1 is much more difficult. If you actually have that passion, which no one else will believe in you, and you actually find a group of people or enough people to actually believe in an idea and you make that change, then you actually live under some sort of delusion that you're actually going to make that change. And then you don't see the risk. So like he said, most of us, in the downside, what's the worst that could happen? Even if you come from a middle-class family, startup founders actually, I was just telling her backstage, you know, will give in anything and everything who sell maybe their cars, their house to make sure that the company is successful.
Right.
So that's you don't really see the risk.
Right.
Because you actually, as a startup founder, you have to believe that the company will make a difference and you will make that change and it will be successful. If you don't believe in it, no one else will. So.
Right. I was going to actually at one point say that the one thing that perhaps defines all of you, is common to all of you is that you're risk takers, but we'll have to think of another term because you don't really see the risk. Most of you don't really seem to see the risk. But Paras, when you're, today when you look back, what do you believe was your biggest challenge on the personal front, if you had any? Was it sort of convincing people at home that this is what you wanted to do, as opposed to a conventional 9-to-5 Naukri? Or what was it personally? Or was it sort of a personal bat within to say, I got to prove something or change, make a difference in my own way?
For me, startup was more about, like he mentioned, making an impact on the world. And I grew up reading stories of, say, Apple, Google, Yahoo, where all the founders in Silicon Valley and elsewhere in US, since I come from a technology background, I read that they were able to make such a huge amount of impact just by having a laptop and writing up some code. And they literally took over the world through their laptops. And if they could do that, I really believed that I had in me to do that myself. So throughout my college days, I founded 3 or 4 different companies. So I knew that I had to keep trying new stuff until I succeeded.
Right.
And the current company in some way succeeded, and there am I.
Right. Is a good idea enough, Akshay? Where does it start? I mean, it starts with perhaps a passion, a drive, but is a good idea enough? Because we've spoken to a lot of people who say, every second person has that great idea up there. And that's the, the beauty of perhaps a country like India. Everyone knows how to do it and everyone's got that, like that, this is going to make it, but this is my big moment, ye raha. But it doesn't work that way, Akshay and then Michael perhaps.
So I think, no. I mean, the short answer is absolutely not. And I think, so I can tell you from my own experience, right? The first business plan we wrote for Avanti was complete garbage.
I see.
Right?
With the wisdom of hindsight, you can say that.
No, it was. I mean, in the sense, we do none of that.
Okay.
Right? So we won a business plan competition with it, but we do absolutely nothing that was in that plan. Right? So at the time, it was a great idea. It just didn't work. Right? And I think what's perhaps much, much more important in my mind is persistence, right? I think not just for the founders, because the founders have a lot more incentive sometimes than the team, but it's the founders and your founding team, right? If these first 5, 6, 7 people, like Michael said and like everyone else said, really care about making this change in the world, are really, really driven by it, and are driven by it to a point, to a level of optimism that's a little bit irrational.
Right.
And if that happens,
that
then
would come with, I guess that comes with the job. I mean, you are the creator and it's your baby in a sense. So, the optimism is perhaps key, right?
And you have to enjoy the small successes, right? There aren't any big successes. I think for the first many years, sometimes the best you'd get is a little bit of success. You'll get some users on a website. You'll get some kids in a center. Something will happen. But this is not going to be I've suddenly made $1 billion. This is going to be it's sort of kind of working.
Correct.
And I think if you...
And it's important to remember also, isn't it, for all of you, that everyone's not going to end up making those $1 billion either. And you need to sort of be at peace with that also. Maybe $1 billion is not everyone's aim either. And even if it is, perhaps the reality is you may not get there.
Yeah.
Michael?
Yeah, so ideas are cheap, right? As in, it's like I completely agree with him. It's just because you have an idea, it doesn't mean that you're actually going to be successful. I mean, you have to be persistent, like he said. You have to be good at operations. You have to be able to convince enough people to actually believe in your idea also. And the first year of a startup is always very difficult. Like, it's actually, you go through so many highs and lows, and there are more lows and highs, and your highs are so, like he said, you get a few users, you get a few customers. So you need to be able to be, your emotional quotient needs to be very high. So you need to be very stable as a person. So
that leads me to my next question. Apar, maybe you can answer that. If the idea is one thing, but it's not everything, what else do you believe matters? Like, if you would sort of look at the top 3 things that sort of go into a successful startup, then, maybe the idea is somewhere there. What else do you, what's number 2 or what's number 1? Maybe we don't do 1, 2, 3, but just the 3 things, not in any order. What else do you believe?
The topmost really is the people who are behind an initiative, right? Like he mentioned, and I agree with her as well, key to success for a startup is a long-term thinking. You are not going to be successful in 1 year and sell your company for $1 billion. You really have to have a very long-term vision, say 5, 10, or even 15 years. And throughout that time, the startup idea, what you start with, will completely change and transform into completely something else. So what remains constant is a set of people who are behind that initiative. And if the people are smart and driven and they can think on their toes, right, they'll adapt and they'll really push it forward every single day.
Right.
And the second biggest thing in my dictionary is really the opportunity, right? Ideas can transform, but if you have an opportunity in front of you, which is a market opportunity, you can apply n number of different ways of solving that opportunity.
Right.
And that's what makes India so interesting and exciting.
Right.
Because there's such a huge amount of opportunity which is still waiting for the relevant ideas
Right.
to be solved with.
Right. Ritvika, what did your experience in all your sort of, in all your experience after the World Bank, what has been the single most frustrating and the most rewarding aspect? I'll start with the frustrating aspects from everyone first. They seem to make the more fun stories.
You see, I think this is a hazard which I have specifically because we work with members of parliaments and we're a non-profit. So one of the big issues I'd say is the system is not exactly as cordial as could be to an entrepreneur. Let me give you an anecdote. So, if you're a non-profit, you have to start out by deciding whether you want to be a trust, a charity, or a cooperative. It takes 1 to 2 weeks to do that. Once you get that, you still can't necessarily get money because what you need is either a 12A or ATG to get money from within the country.
I see.
You can't apply for that for the first 2 years. You wait for 2 years, then you finally are able to apply for it, you get it, then you have to wait for another year to get a FCRA, which means now you can get money from overseas. What that basically means is that as startup people, as passionate, hungry entrepreneurs, we really want to be able to raise capital to be able to do more.
Swifter, right.
But the system is not yet that cordial to us in the sense of encouraging entrepreneurs. And I think the government realizes this as well, but the point is now it kind of needs to change.
Actually, I sort of saw you nodding in agreement to a lot of those points there. I felt that you could sort of feel the pain there.
No, absolutely, right. So I think
So funding is one problem that
I think regulation, right?
Exactly.
I think that's a huge problem. Just to raise a round of capital, right? If you're just going to raise preference shares, the number of meetings, extraordinarily general meetings, I tend to lose track of this. And number of meetings you have to do in India, and the amount of paperwork you have to submit often in hard copy is just unbelievable, right? Our auditing requirements are ridiculous. The company law is ridiculous. Like it's just all designed as if I actually the best analogy I can give you. It's almost like they treat a zero revenue startup the same way as they would treat a publicly listed company, and that's really, really frustrating, right? It adds months and weeks, which is like years in startup time.
Which makes your story sort of, even more remarkable. You kept going in the face of it all, especially the two of you in this case. You just kept going. Did you ever have sort of those dark days when you said, what is this for, and how much can I? I'm sure that happens, right? I mean, I would imagine be quite normal before you reach where you believe that deep sigh and finally, So did you also go through that?
It's a once a week thing. Like, you pick out your once a week where you're like, this day I'm just going to complain till 8 in the morning till, 8 tomorrow morning.
Right.
So it does happen. But I think the point is you just need to snap out of it. And, as you build a team, the biggest thing for me is to look at my colleagues and be like, we're in this together. We're going to push through this. Right. But I mean, to echo Akshay's point, it is a tremendous frustration in terms of working in a system which is not necessarily supporting, and especially when it comes to, so capital investment in this country is great. I mean, if you look at the number of donors, funders, it's growing and it'll continue to grow. But there's a difference between a guy saying yes and then getting the money in the bank. And that gap is it's just really painstaking.
And that's a lot of red tape involved. You're saying between that commitment and the money actually exchanging hands.
It is.
There's.
Yes.
Okay, so that's one problem that we've identified. What else holding us back? We're slipping into a quick break. Back with more. Can we realistically dream of being the next startup nation? How much time is it going to take us to get there? More on that after this quick break.